Hello, everybody. It's good to be here to talk to you guys. I try never to turn down an opportunity to meet up with young guys. And I was telling my colleagues that occasionally I get these opportunities to speak to NUS undergrads about the newspaper. And I would take it up, even though it is usually a situation which journalists are not familiar with. Journalists are usually used to asking the questions and listening, but today I'll be giving you the talk. I was also telling one of the guys here who's doing the coordinating to try and keep the session as informal as possible. I would like to hear questions. So I would give you, I'll give you a quick sort of rundown on the Straits Times and a couple of things that we are doing. And I will wait for you guys to ask the questions. In classrooms of about 100 undergrads, I've gotten some very interesting questions. So ask and I will try and answer to the best of my ability, okay? Okay, some interesting facts about the Straits Times. Now, everybody is familiar with the product. Everybody reads the Straits Times not as regularly as SPH wishes. But we know you guys go online, you know, you get clippings and stuff like that. So I tried to look for some stuff which I think you may not be familiar with. You know, some of the things that happen either behind the scenes or some of the things that you might miss, okay? Now this is something, it's SPH does, the Straits Times does a lot of good stuff, fantastic columns, some very good investigative reporting and all these things. But I decided to draw your attention to something which I think many of you might have come across or missed most of the time, but would not know what this is about. Okay, it's called What It Should Have Been. It's not a regular column, although you see it quite often tucked away in the first few pages. Now this is something which we run as a correction when we do mistakes in the newspaper. Now the Straits Times is one of the few newspapers in the world that actually runs corrections. Okay, so we deal with it in a couple of ways. Now sometimes we do what we call a file correction, which means a newsmaker would call us and tell us, let's say there was an event and at the charity event, 5 million was raised. And the Straits Times reported 50 million, right? There was an extra zero. And the newsmaker would call us the next day and say, hey, we only raised 5 million, but you guys reported 50 million. Can you just make a file correction? Okay, so when there's a file correction, we don't publish it in print. We just go back to our library and make all the corrections, okay? So for obvious reasons, the newsmaker would not want to run the published correction, but we make sure that the stuff is corrected. Then we do the published correction. So published correction is what you saw just now. In this instance, I think we talked about pork from Malaysia, the ban being lifted, and actually it was not from all over Malaysia where the ban was lifted, but only pork that was coming from Sarawak, okay? Now, sometimes we pay for our mistakes, okay? There was this case many years ago during my reporting days when there was a story, a court story of a guy who had picked up a prostitute, gone to the hotel, and the prostitute had drugged him. And she took his credit cards, used it, and stuff like that. So when the court case came, and our court reporter reported the case, there was a marketing officer from the credit card company. So our reporter got the names mixed up, and the credit card marketing officer ended up being the prostitute, and the other way around. Okay, so if I remember correctly, I think we paid something like $25,000 to that lady whom we called a prostitute. No? Okay, now, one of the reasons why I also decided to pick on errors and file corrections was this letter that we received a couple of days ago. It was from a lady who said that she was traumatized because there was an error in the Straits Times and she couldn't sleep, and it was the second error that she had seen in 3 days and stuff like that. And she had to get it off her chest, and I think it was a grammatical error. And so she wrote to us and said, how could you are the Straits Times, how could you make mistakes like that, and stuff like that. Okay, so the next 1-2 slides, I just want to give you some perspective, okay, on why sometimes errors happen. Now, some of you might be familiar with these books. A lot of the flies I think you would have done maybe in your secondary school. Catch-22 is a very famous book, supposed to be one of the best novels written. And Jane Green, I think, is more current. Okay. Now, all these novels have a word length of about 60,000, 80,000, 100,000. All right. The Straits Times and Catch-22, for example. Joseph Keller started to write the book in 1953, and he published the book in 1961. All right. Jane Green, her Tempting Fate book was written in 6 months. All right. So a daily edition of the Straits Times has the same number of words as a smaller novel. Okay, so the Straits Times, which is put out in 24 hours, is about the same length, a number of words, as some of these novels. Okay, so we have a limited time to check, we have a limited time to go through the stuff, and sometimes errors like that happen. Okay. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with ad revenue for the Straits Times. Something like, now these are our classified ads, okay? This is the new classified ads. The new classified ads has color and things like that. Previously, it used to be just black and white strips. Now, the Straits Times, long time ago, used to have 4 days a year when it never used to print. Okay, 4 days. So you will have, I think, it was first and second day of Chinese New Year, Christmas Day, and Jan 1st. Okay, so now we do not print twice a year. Now the reason for this is that for every day the Straits Times did not print, we lost 4 million in revenue. Okay, now this was at its peak. All right, I'm not saying it is now, but at its peak. So I just want to give you an idea of where the Straits Times is today as compared to the past. All right. Okay. Now, one of the things that we are often asked now, I think especially with the internet, is whether Straits Times is a 24-hour newspaper. Now this is something that I pulled out from this morning's email in my inbox. And there you will see something from Paul Zack. Paul Zack is our guy who is based in the US. And at about 2 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m., Paul Zack comes alive and he takes over and updates stuff in the Straits Times. So this is what he sent out, a list of the stuff that he sent out. Okay, and we sent out to our readers something which says, while you were sleeping, 5 stories you might have missed for the May 27th edition. Okay, so while the newsprint in Singapore operates from in the morning till about midnight, okay, after midnight we have people in the UK and the US working for us, taking over the running of the website. All right? Okay. Now, the digital landscape. Today, one of the things that the print is competing with is the digital landscape. Now, Straits Times has a very established name, and a lot of the journalists in the newsroom, people like me, have worked on mainly print. I was in the online edition for about 2-3 years, but after that came back to print. Okay, so increasingly, one of the tussles that you find in the newsroom is this tussle of whether the story should run in the online or should we keep it for print. Okay, when we have a good story, a strong story, there's this big discussion, should we put it online? Because if you put it online, a lot of the other newspapers watch the Straits Times online website. Okay, and when they see that we have a good story, they either pick it up and rewrite it without attributing. Sometimes they don't attribute it to the Straits Times. Sometimes they pick it up and go to the newsmaker and say, oh, we saw this on the Straits Times. Is it true? Can you tell us more about it? And they run it in their publication as well. Okay, so there's always that tussle. Our online site is coming to us, asking us to give us the news, whereas print says, hey, let's keep it till tomorrow. We'll run it in print tomorrow. Okay? Now, these are some of the new things that we are doing with the Straits Times. More and more, we have our Facebook site, which has been pushing out stories every day. I think over the past 2 years, the likes that we have, I think Facebook likes has hit about 500,000, and the numbers have doubled. Now, our Facebook site promotes stories, breaking news stories, and stories which are from the print, okay? And people log in, read the stuff. We know that young people tend to read Facebook, tend to go onto Facebook, and we put the stories up there, let you guys read it, and then push it out to your friends to read it. Okay, so that's our digital landscape. Huh? Now, every day in the newsroom itself, we have this huge board. I think if you look at the top, you can see how big this monitor actually is. It's about 3 56-inch monitors, okay? And it gives you a live update of stories that are being read by readers. Okay, so every now and then you see the stories moving up and down, and that gives you a feel of the people coming to our website and the stories that are being read. Now, Um, if you look at a lot of the stories, once again, we have this, this disagreement in the newsroom about the kind of stories that should run in print. Okay, because if you look at the stories, a lot of the stories here tend to be rape, molest, burglars, robbery cases, and crime stories. Okay, whereas print stories tend to be more serious stories. Okay, so our editors will look at this and say, look at this molest story, it's doing so well, can we get more? Whereas in print, the print side would always tell our editor, okay, the guys who are reading this are young guys like you know, who would not be interested or less interested in government policies and issues like that. So that's why you have this kind of stories. Should we really be running these stories in print as well? So it's fine for online, but not so for print. All right, so there's this tussle. And so what we have in the newsroom is this very divergent views on what the newsroom team should be doing. The newsroom reporters are the same guys who do both this and print, okay? But because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of interest in this, our newsroom reporters are forced to pursue these kind of stories as well. Okay, now this is a closer idea of those stories. Which is what I was telling you, man charged in Philippines for casino, boy jailed for, so it's all, you know, Indonesian student jailed for touching women's buttocks. So if you see the trend, in fact, today's one is tamer than usual. Okay, you have one or two more serious stories there, but usually you find a lot more crime stories. Okay. Now, my online guys have asked me to put this as an ad. They told me not to let you guys leave the hall unless you sign up and register with us. So. Now, if you are not on the Straits Times Facebook as yet, or Twitter, Instagram is still new, our Pinterest is also still new, go to the website and look at the stuff that you have, that we offer, okay? Now, like I said, I just wanted to give you a broad overview. Ask the questions. Let's have an informal question and answer. And no question is too silly to ask. So just ask whatever question you feel like doing, whether it's whatever questions you feel like asking, whether it is questions about operations, whether it's questions about our readers. Like I said, I'll try and answer it to the best of my ability. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. All right, we're going to invite you to take a seat right here. Okay? Yeah, we'll just leave it right there. Thank you. Now, as Matthew has mentioned, we'd like to keep it very informal, but again, this is the process in which you will learn as much as you can about the industry as well. So please feel free to come up, introduce yourselves, and pose your questions to Matthew. Now, to facilitate this entire session, and I'm sure it's going to be nice and interesting, we have the honor of having to invite one of your JC1 students. With all that you have, Yishun Junior College is making his way up right now. Even before I mention his name, he's so excited. Please welcome Gabriel Kung.
Thank you very much, Ravi, and thank you, Mr. Matthew Pereira, for his wonderful and insightful speech. I am Gabriel from Yishun Junior College, and today I will be your moderator for today's Q&A session. Thank you. Okay, perhaps before we begin the Q&A session, let's establish some ground rules. And it is mainly that If you have a question to ask, proceed to the 2 mic stands placed in the hall on the left and the right-hand side, and state your name, which college you're from, and ensure that your questions are short, clear, and concise. And without further ado, perhaps could we have the first question from the floor? There's no need to be shy. This is actually very useful for your GP. All right, thank you very much for our first question.
Hi, I'm Jasper from Yishun Junior College, CTG 118, and I would like to ask a question about how Straits Times operate. So, just curiously asking, what does Straits Times deem as a news article worth being published? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
It's Jasper.
Desrel. Thanks, Desrel, for the question.
Jasper.
Desper.
Jasper.
Jasper. Wow. Okay. Thanks, Jasper. Okay, what do we deem worthy of print? Now, I showed you just now the our online stories that are well read, okay, and you will see a different set of stories running in print, okay. Now, depending on what kind of newspaper it is, okay, generally, depending on what kind of newspaper it is, you would pick stuff which you think your readership is looking for, okay? So, like the online, for example, the Straits Times Online, we know there's a lot of interest always in court stories, okay? Almost any court story is lapped up by readers. So we run a lot of the court stories. We try and get the court cases and all happen in the morning. There's an afternoon session as well. So we run it as soon as our reporter is there. As soon as the reporter steps out of court, she would file the stories using her handphone, and she will email it to us. We will edit it and put it up. Okay, so for the online crowd, it is that kind of stories. Now, for the print crowd, I think we do a couple of things. You have a mix. You want to give stories which are entertaining, things that people want to read. But at the same time, you want to run stories which you think people might want to know. Now, there's always a debate about, why should the Straits Times tell us what we should know? But there are important stories like government policies, education policies. If there are changes in rules to, let's say, JC admission, for example, we would like to publicize those stories. So we feel that, hey, this is a story that is important. Many parents want to read it. Many people, the students should know it. So we run it, okay? But then again, news is a very subjective thing, okay? What I might think is important, my colleague may not think so, okay? So we would agree, but whether it should be the main story or the second story, I think we would differ. Okay, Jasper, I hope I've answered your question.
I see. Thank you very much.
Okay, perhaps could I ask regarding that, what do you guys actually really consider as news that people really would find interesting, like law cases, like some of the cases you shared with us during your speech, some of it were perhaps a bit sensationalist. What do you think is actually what draws people in to read the Straits Times?
Okay. I think I think all of us are K-pos now, right? So law cases, court cases, stories about crime, stories about molest, I think almost everybody reads. People are just curious. What did this guy do? This story just now, which I showed you, it was a guy who is doing his PhD. That means he's doing his doctorate, So he was the one who molested the woman. So if you see a headline, PhD student molesting someone on the train, you would read it. You would read it because you are a train user all the time, right? You say, wow, this could happen to you. So you might read it for that reason. Or you might read it because you say, well, PhD student also does this kind of thing, so you would read it for that reason. And in fact, I don't take the train often because I drive, but I was telling my colleague, I find this very frightening. In a packed train, when there are a lot of people around, how do you know? I was telling my colleague that whenever I'm in the train, I always hold the train rails with my two hands up in the so that I will be clear, you see, because it's just so packed, you see. So that's one. Then I think people read stories which affect their lives. All right. Any HDB story is usually very popular. All right. Changes in HDB policies, or any car policy story is popular. COE stories, because it affects us. You see, a lot of people are sitting around waiting for the COE prices to go down so that they can buy a car. Okay, so any COE price story is well read. Okay, so usually the stories that are well read are stories that affect the lives of people. All right, so I think if we run a story on people killed in Nepal in an earthquake, there will be less interest in it. Not because we don't empathize with them or stuff like that, but it really is far away. Okay, so you get less traction for that kind of stories unless you have an unusually high number of deaths, okay, as compared to domestic stories.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pereira. Perhaps could we have more questions from the floor? Anyone? You can encourage your friends to come up. All right. All right, thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Amirul Hakim from Innova Junior College. This is a bit of a follow-up question. How does the Straits Times manage the balance between sensationalism, pandering to the public, and as well as government intentions and all that?
Sorry, no government?
As in, like certain interests that Straits Times would like to push forward. Yeah.
Okay. I sense you are alluding to something, but you're not saying it, but okay. I shall answer the question. Now, how do we balance? I think if you look at the Straits Times print, for example, you will find that you don't have a lot of these court and crime stories. In fact, I think at one time when our editor talked about cutting down the court cases, we said, hey, this is what people want to read, okay? But our editor felt, hey, this is not good for Straits Times image. The Straits Times is a serious paper. We don't depend on court cases, sensational stories to sell, okay? The Chinese evening papers, I think you'll be familiar with them. The evening papers run a lot of these stories. Okay, so how do we manage a balance? Okay, so it really depends on a day-to-day basis. On some days, you may have an accident or a killing or something in the evening papers. Sometimes we pick up stories from the evening papers. We follow up on the evening paper stories. So sometimes you have a killing or something, and it's a day where there is no space in print. The pages are very tight. There are a lot of major announcements. Let's say there's Parliament happening that day. So the pages are tiny, so we drop that story. Okay? But on a day where it is very quiet, we might find space for that story. Okay, so, but I think there is a limit to the number of court stories that we do. For example, I think typically, if you pick up the Straits Times today, the last page, the last home page would be devoted to court stories. Okay, sometimes if we have good, strong court stories, we would go to the second last page, but we tuck it always at the back. Okay, partly it is to avoid this, people saying that we are being sensational and insensitive and things like that. Okay, so we tuck it right at the back of the home pages, and the rest of the space, I think, is devoted to our exclusive stories that our reporters bring in, and then stories, diary jobs, things that happen. Okay, there's no running away from the government. The government is the biggest newsmaker. The government, everything the government announces affects almost every Singaporean. So the major announcements come from them, and we do give them big play because they are announcements that affect a lot of people's lives. Okay, and when we don't run it, you have people calling us and asking us, how come Straits Times didn't highlight this? How come the Straits Times didn't do this? Okay, so one case, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the City Harvest trial. Now, it's been going on for a long, long time, okay? And I tell my court reporters, hey, even I, as the deputy editor, am getting tired of it, I don't want to read the stories. I find it very painful to edit the stories because, there's only a slight change from yesterday's stories. The stories sound like the day before stories. But when we skip one day's court reporting of the City Harvest trial, we get emails, we get letters, complaints to the editor saying, hey, the Straits Times is covering things up, how come you're not running City Harvest trial and things like that. The only reason Straits Times didn't run it was because there was hardly any movement from the day before. But yet, you have all these people complaining. Okay, so it's a balance that we maintain every day. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps just a personal question regarding that, since you mentioned how you manage stories and how you allocate space. Like during your speech, you said that in the past there were 4 days where the Straits Times didn't print newspapers, and because of that, there was like a loss of $4 million in revenue. Could I just ask perhaps how much of the space in the Straits Times are allocated to perhaps advertisements and in comparison to the ratio of actual stories?
Okay. I'm not very familiar with ad ratio, present ad ratio. At one time, okay, so there may be changes to this, but I can only tell you from what I can remember. At one time, it used to be about, I think, 60-70% ad ratio. All right, so I see my colleagues discussing, and I'm not sure whether I'm completely off the mark. Huh? Okay, so they're saying no, it's quite accurate still. Okay, so 60-70% of the space is devoted to ads. Okay, now the ad ratio is very important to the Straits Times because you can run a lot of pages, and the ads cover the cost of your print. Okay. So if, let's say, we don't meet, let's say, a 60-70% ad ratio, what we do is we shrink the paper. Shrink the paper as in not in size, but number of pages. So let's say you have a certain number of ads, okay? When you run it over, let's say 40 pages, you may have an ad ratio of, let's say, 65%. But if you bring the number of pages down to 36, your ad ratio goes up to 70%. Okay, so we play with that kind of stuff to hit an ad ratio of about 60-70%.
All right. Thank you very much. Perhaps could I have another question from the floor? Anybody? Okay. Thank you very much. The boy on the left-hand side of the stage.
Hi, my name is Khairul from CTG 121. My question is a little bit controversial, but to what extent does the government actually control the media? Like, just how much censorship is there?
Okay. Carol, thank you. My colleagues were asking me about whether I was going to talk about censorship. I said, don't worry, people will ask, so there's no point wasting time on the question. Okay, so Carol, thank you for asking. I'm sure a lot of people would have wanted to raise the question, so you did the others a favor. Actually, only readers ask us about censorship, The Straits Times, I think if you ask journalists, they would tell you that there is no censorship. Okay? The government has imposed some very strict rules when it comes to newspaper publication. Okay? Like the license is renewable, I think, once every year or something, right? So while no one foresees the government saying that, okay, shut down the Straits Times because it would be detrimental to the government's image more than, to us, okay, there is still that rule, So there are rules like that, and Singapore's press ratings are always low because of these rules that are in place. But within the newsroom, I will tell you that we don't experience anything. You will find the normal push and pull, the tussle with newsmakers. Not only does the government do it, the government will call up and complain about a story, saying that this story is unfair, your headline is inaccurate, this is this, your reporter is saying this when you should have highlighted this, you focused on a negative. We get feedback like that all the time, okay? But we get feedback like that from other newsmakers too, not only the government. Every newsmaker, when we run a story, quite often, once you run a negative story, you will get feedback from these guys, okay? Now, at least the government would complain to our editor and complain to this and that, and we would have to explain to our editor, okay, now these are the facts, and this is what the reporter did, okay? And that's it. It usually stops there. There are big advertisers in the newspaper who, when we run a negative story on them, have pulled out the ads, okay? And they have pulled out full-page ads for 1-2 weeks. And and we're talking about $200,000, $300,000 worth of this one, money, you see. So while people ask about government, putting pressure and things like that, I tell you the private sector puts as much pressure on the Straits Times as the government does. Okay, so I think for us in the newsroom, we have accepted it as a way in life, as a way of life in the newsroom. MINDEF, for example, MINDEF is very tough, takes a very tough stand about its image, all right? Because the government wants to portray MINDEF in a particular light, all right? So I remember many years ago, the Straits Times ran what we thought was a very nice picture. And I think if you were a photographer would agree it's a good picture. So it was a picture, it was on our front page, was a picture of all our reservists or NS men, I'm not sure, all in their uniform and stuff like that. I think they were heading for the range or something all of them were holding umbrellas. And MINDEF really freaked out, you know. They said, hey, you know, you make our men look like softies, you know, holding umbrellas, you know, colored umbrellas and all these things at the range. And it never occurred to anybody in the newsroom when we ran that picture. We just thought it was a great picture, you know, reservists and all these things. These guys want to keep themselves dry, okay? So MINDEF sent us a series of letters complaining. Okay, so the government bodies do complain. MOE also complains because, you know, everybody has kids in school. Today we ran a story about MOE backpedaling a bit about some new JC. And I think we ran too many stories and the MOE found itself backpedaling. I'm sure MOE is not happy with the stories that the Straits Times ran, but I don't think we will hear from MOE, right? MOE will make it difficult for us, you know, when we ask them questions, they will say, hey, we don't owe you a living, you know, we don't need to answer you, you know, and we said, okay, it's up to you, you know, we will just say the MOE did not want to respond to our questions and we just run it, okay? A more recent case, I shouldn't tell you the story, but there was a reporter who did a story, and one of the ministers complained. She based her stories on a survey that she saw, the survey findings, and the minister said, hey, this is not accurate and stuff like that. And she told the minister, you do not know how to interpret data. And so the minister said, hey, can we have tea and can we chat? You know, he said, I take care of a lot of numbers in the country and you tell me I don't know how to interpret data. Okay, so I think that is an ongoing chat. But trust me, I think it is something that happens all the time. The government, you know, has a lot of muscle. The government does put a lot of pressure and stuff like that. But the government knows that we have to run the stories. You know, if the Straits Times is not credible, I think it works against the government more than anybody else. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps could I have a bit more questions from the floor? Anyone perhaps this time on this side of the floor? Anyone? Come on.
Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid. Don't think your questions are too basic. All right? Just ask.
Sorry. I wanted to ask about if Straits Times follows any sort of quota on how much to report on each political party during election season, because as far as I've seen, the current ruling party gets more of their achievements covered during election season in the Straits Times. Thank you.
Okay. Now, after the last election, I think Lau Thia Kiang said he thanked the Straits Times for the amount of space that was devoted to the opposition. Okay? I think it was more than we had ever done before. I think in the past, we have not given the opposition as much a say. But when you have one opposition member in parliament at that point in time, it was Chiam and another Workers' Party guy. Okay, when you have one opposition member, it is very difficult to devote 30% of coverage to the opposition when 99% is made up of the other guys. Okay, so going by those figures alone, we feel that it is a bit difficult to justify. But I think now we do give a lot more space. We run a lot more opposition stories, unlike, let's say, in the past. I think partly also the pressure comes from online. The Straits Times doesn't run it. You find half-baked stories online, stories which are not accurate. So I think even if we run the stories and the government is not happy about it, they would rather we run the stories than to find an inaccurate story on some other online site. Okay? I hope I've answered your question.
Perhaps is there any more questions? I mean, you guys should take this chance. Mr. Pereira doesn't come here every day. Anybody?
Ask, don't feel intimidated, don't think your questions are silly. All right? So just ask.
Anybody? Don't be shy. Okay, perhaps maybe can I ask another question?
Sure.
Just out of curiosity, with regards to the Straits Times, how many levels of bureaucracy do you have to go through before you can, let's say, publish a story, or like something that's perhaps a bit controversial? Like, how many layers do you have to go through before it can be certified and said, okay, you can publish this story?
Okay. If you give me an example, I mean, so that I have a better idea. Give me an example of a
Perhaps
story.
like stories regarding ISIS, for example.
ISIS. I think foreign stories are generally hardly gets any attention from the editor. I think if there are stories that the editor of the newspaper would be concerned about, it would tend to be local stories. Okay, our foreign stories, we have a guy called a copy taster. He would pull out the stories, and then the foreign editor will look at the story, and we would run it. Okay, so no real sensitivity down there. Okay, but let's say domestic stories, it's pretty much the same, except if you have a very sensitive story.
Perhaps what about during the period of time during the Little India riots? Like, I assume such domestic stories required quite a lot of vetting through before it could be like published and okay go.
Actually, there wasn't. When you say vetting, by whom?
Perhaps by the publishing team or by someone who may deem it as something a bit controversial to post on the Straits Times.
Okay, Gabriel. I really don't think so. Okay, for example, the night of the riots, I was on duty. Okay, and I had a phone call at night telling me that there's a riot in Little India. Maybe you want to send your reporter down. So I said, what kind of riot? So I thought, it was the usual 5 to 10 people fighting after a drink or something. So the person said, no, there are about 300 people involved. So I said, yeah, right, and I hung up. And about 2 or 3 minutes later, a person called again and said, there's a riot in Little India. It's happening at this place, at this place, this place. There are 2 police vehicles. There are this, there's that, there's that. So from the sound of it, the person sounded like someone telling me that there's a serious problem on the ground. I need to send someone down. Okay? And so I sent the person down. Okay? And the stories that ran, basically my reporter on the ground filed the stories. I cleared it, and it went to print. you know. So I think our editor probably saw the stories. Initially, I moved. I think the stories were on page 2 of the paper, and as I saw the pictures come in, as a reporter gave me more stuff, I moved it out to page 1, moved it out to the front. Okay, and the editor also would have seen it, would have seen my decision, but you know, that was it. You know, so we decide at our end. So unless he objects very strongly, there aren't very many levels.
Perhaps, is there ever a time where a story had some disagreement between staff members?
Between staff members, huh? Okay. Okay, I think probably the Amos Yee stories, for example, might be a good example. Okay, within the newsroom, we can't agree as to how much publicity to give Amos Yee. I think some people feel, one, that this guy is a sick kid. You know, you shouldn't be doing anything against him. He needs to see a doctor. There are others who feel that this guy is a smart kid. He's trying to milk all the publicity that he can get, and we shouldn't cover him for that reason. So there's this group which says we shouldn't cover him because he's sick. There's this other group which says that we shouldn't cover him because what he wants is publicity. Then there's a third group in the newsroom which says we should cover it because it is news. You know, he's making all sorts of allegations. He's saying he was molested. He's defying the judge. All these things are news events, so we should report it. Okay? So we usually have a debate as to how to approach the story. I think initially we ran the stories, but I think after a couple of days we decided, okay, you know, we'll hold back because all he wants is publicity.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Pereira. Due to time constraints, perhaps there's only time for one more question from the floor, and I would encourage the floor to take this last opportunity to ask a final question. Anybody? This is the last chance. Is it someone from the top? Okay.
Hi, I'm Jin Heng from CTG 105. I will ask, how do you communicate with overseas correspondents for your articles? For your overseas articles, foreign articles, I mean. Thank you.
Okay. I think now, thank you. Sorry, I didn't notice you guys up there. No, I think now it is so much easier. We call each other very regularly. There is Skype. So our overseas guys would usually get a briefing at the start of the day. So it's very much like what happens in the newsroom. Before the reporter goes out, we would talk to the reporter and say, okay, this is what's happening. These are the things you need to look out for. These are some possible things, some possible answers that you can expect them to say, but you need to probe this and this and this. Okay, so we would give the guy a brief. But I think the difference with our overseas correspondents is that these guys are more familiar with, let's say for China, they will be more familiar with China than we are. So they would call us and tell us, I've got a story on this, 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 I can offer you this. And then we would do our background research, and we would call them later in the day and tell them that we read this, can you give us a bit more details on this aspect when you're filing your story? Okay, then in the evening, they have a direct access to our system, which means they file their story straight into the system. If they are out in the field, they would email to us, and we would just copy, edit it, and put it into the system. Okay, so now it's quite easy. It's not like in the past. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that signals that the Q&A has come to an end. I would like to thank all of the audience members for their wonderful questions. And I would like to thank Mr. Pereira for his insight